Hello, your friendly neighborhood evil overlord here with a little tutorial on how I make my layer tattoos. This little tutorial will have 3 phases. Phase 1 will be in a sculpting program to lay down the details we're gonna be using in the later phases. As you can see here, I'm starting my work in ZBrush, but you're free to use any program you're more comfortable sculpting in. Blender works great for this, or any other program really. The head you see here is Avalon from Lelutka. You can get it from their official kit. I will be editing it to obtain a good high poly to use during phase 2, and that phase will take place in Substance Painter. So, without further ado, let's start this. Grab your favorite brush and start putting in all the details you want. It may be a scar or some cybernetic implants. It's really up to you. For the sake of speed, I'm gonna be doing this a bit fast since it's meant to be an example. When you're satisfied with your work, just hit export and save your high poly version of the hat. This will be all for phase 1. So now I'm gonna mute myself and do a bit of it. Welcome to phase 2. During this phase, we're gonna set the basis for our substance file and bake down the high poly so that we have a good texture we can then import in Photoshop for phase 3. Remember, we're not trying to have a super realistic detail scar here, we're trying to make these into stackable layers to be assembled in Word. So, what are we going to do is try to make a very contrasty image that shows very well the shadows from the highlights. First thing first, we're gonna have to import the head that we choose to use into Substance. Make sure that it's UV. As you can see here, I have the Avalon head in his EvoX version. Secondly, let's hop to the texture settings and scroll down to Bake Mesh Maps. Once in here, you have to add the high poly version that we made previously, and then mess a bit with the settings. You don't have to touch anything too much. I usually just put the anti-aliasing to 4, and the only other thing that I would recommend, if it's by any chance you have red dots shining through any red parts really, you need to increase the max frontal distance until they disappear. That way you avoid any possible artifacts. After that, maybe remove ID because we're not gonna use it, and then press Bake Select Texture and wait for computer to finish baking. Okay, now that your PC has finished baking, please return to the painting mode and you will be able to see here that your high poly has been successfully put into your low poly. You can see I went with a very simple cybernetic augmentation. After this, we want to create our texture. Here I have a preset one that I use for this. I'm gonna go on and explain what the different layers are. We start with a base. It's just a flat dark color with a roughness that is not too shiny. As you can see, it doesn't reflect that much. We don't need that for now. Then in the skin base, I went a bit out of my way to make it more skin-like, like when I do my own skin. So there's like a base, there's the reds, the blue parts that all skin have, and all of those things. But you can just go with a flatter color if you don't want all the variation. It's really up to you. I put some procedural redness, but that's more me going out of my way to do that than any proper need, I suppose. But what we need to make sure to do is to make sure to highlight properly the darker part and the lighter part, as you can see here. For the darker part, I use some MG dirt as the generator, but ambient occlusion also works well. I sharpen it out a bit to make it pop a bit more. You can see all these dots to help convey like the skin imperfections and roughnesses. And for the highlights, what I did was a metal edgeware, but the curved one also works very well. I blurred it out a bit because otherwise it was too sharp being the metal edgeware one. But you can also add some paint and add some detail by hand. Here I'm gonna do it very fast, so I'm not gonna refine it too much for sake of speed. Another thing that I added is a normal enhancement. All I did was just plop the normal map that we just generated inside a fill layer. And all it does is basically enhance a bit more the valley and bumps of the scar so that it's easier to tell what's what. It's not too bad, it's just some simple layers, and as you can see, it conveys very well what side of what it is. After we have this, it's time to export the textures. So what we're gonna do is go to export textures, select the path that you want the texture to be saved in, and the first one you save is the document channel normal plus AO. No alpha because we don't really have transparency here. When you're done with that, you just export it. And the second texture that we're gonna need is going to be the 2D view. With the 2D view, we're just gonna get what actually we are seeing in the 2D view, which is very useful for what we need in Photoshop. So save that one too. Remember, you can also change the HDRI from this panel to what suits you best. I have an Atelier one that I modified here, but we can just go with Panorama if you prefer. Is the base one. Some people hate it, some people really hate it, but this one everybody has, and as you can see, it still pops. There are plenty of HDRIs in Substance, and there are plenty that you can download from a website called HDRI Heaven. I will link it in the description. They're all free and they're amazing. You can add so many of them to create the light you need in Substance. Anyways, this is it for phase 2, and I'm gonna see you in phase 3. Here we are, phase 3 at last. I'm gonna be doing this in Photoshop, but any program that you're familiar with, that you prefer to use for photo manipulation, is fine. So what we need to do is open up our 2D view that we obtain from Substance, and other things we need, as you can see here in my layers, a black fill map, a white one, and then we're gonna need some of these, but let's proceed in order. What we need to do first is do a rough selection of the area that we are interested in. So just grab your lasso tool and make a rough selection of what you need. For the eye part, is really up to you if you want the inside or not. We can always refine later anyway. But for now, just a rough selections. Once you have it, duplicate your base one so you keep one intact as a backup, and apply it as a mask. That way you only have this. Okay, now is when we go in and refine it. So what I usually do, I work in the mask so it's non-destructive. It's my personal preference, but if you prefer to just go destructive, rasterize the layer and erase out of it. I prefer to go non-destructive, so I'm going to be working on the mask, and I'm going to grab a brush and start. A texture brush would be better, like if you have any, just reduce the amount of non-needed part and go in and erase what's not needed. You can take as much time as you need to do this. I'm gonna do it a bit rough and fast. Well, maybe not that fast. There we go. Here we go. This is the rough selection and has been cleaned up a bit. Let me fill here a bit more, maybe, yeah. too much. There we go. Yes, once you're done this, I'm sorry, my Photoshop is in another language, but you can add a saturation of these filters. I think they're called filters, I'm not sure, to make it go grayscale. And then we're gonna add, we're gonna do the shadows first. So you're gonna want, this one is the tonal values, I think. Well, it is this one. And you want it to make it go so that it only shows the darker part. Everything else needs to be white. And then you make the background white. Once you have done this, go into the channels and control click on one of them to select only the black part. Once you've done that, we're gonna go and make one layer. It can be like a fill layer with just that, and call it shadows. Invert it so it's only showing that the blue part is gonna be the shadows. So we have the selection there. Now we're gonna do the same thing but for the highlights, and how we do that is basically the opposite. Keep the saturation one, but make another one of these that makes only see like the highlights. And instead of a white background, you put a black background. See? And again, we go into the channels, control click on one of them to select, and we do the same thing. We create another fill layer. The color doesn't matter at this point. That is gonna only show the highlights. Now we have stored the information for our main selections that we're gonna use for this. Personally, I have this skin base that is a skin I made, and I use it just to help me see. So I activate the shadows, and I usually make them a color that, you know, matches what is gonna be in Word. Remember, every one of these is gonna be tintable in Word. So a brownish color on the red tones that matches the skin. Of course, if the skin was different, it would have been a different type. Then the highlight one, this one usually goes white, and then you just mess a bit with the opacity to not make it blinding. And now you have your base. You have to go in and tweak it. So these lines are too thick probably for the highlights, and you can see that. So what you do is go into the mask, black color for the brush, and reduce them and make them less sharp. This is a fine work. Like you will spend a lot of time on this stage and going back and forth from SecondLife to test them out. I would suggest local textures, because every time you save over them, they update. So if you have two monitors, you can keep your viewer on the other monitor, keep saving over and see how it changes, and when you're happy with it. But this is the gist of it. You can just go in and fix it. Of course, I add additional layer to this. So underneath the shadows, so let me plop them in the correct order. Oops. In between. I make usually a blush layer. Let's make it reddish. A bit more on that side. And I just go around and create a blush for the underneath. Maybe if I switch to white, it will be better. I do a blush for the underneath and keep adding to it until I'm happy with it. Then I do sharper shadows. The sharper shadows go into the part that you want to be more darker, more sharp. Same things with the highlight. There's the base highlight that is gonna be not completely opaque. It will have some transparency, and then there's those sharp lines that are gonna be probably fully white and 100% opacity, and you add them in certain spots. As you can see though, you can see through, right? The skin underneath, you can see it. That's the point of it, because we want the actual skin to shine through where it's supposed to. And that's how this type of tattoo work. Well, I say tattoo is more for scars and those kind of things, but you can be creative with it. This is my process, and it's gonna take a long time to refine it. So it's not something you just snap your fingers and it appears all cool in Word. It's gonna take a lot of back and forth to see how it looks, what needs to be changed, if you need to add some more blush in certain areas, some more shadow somewhere else to make something pop. And remember, this is gonna be easier on an Evo X UV, but especially if you're trying to do stuff like the neck or the side of the torso or the legs, you're gonna have a hard time, mostly because of how SL base UV is. There's very little space in the UV. It means that you have very little pixels. So it will take a lot of refining and going pixel by pixel, completely zoomed in to do it. And sometimes it changes from body to body. So you're gonna have to do a lot of back and forth and check in with different bodies to see what works best. But that's something that every tattoo creator ever will tell you. The neck is horrible. That's the worst part. Especially when you go from an Evo X to a normal SL neck. Because look how much space we have in the neck for the Evo X UV. And in the SL UV, it's super tiny. So the transition is gonna be harsh. The next step that I was asked to illustrate is how I do the material. Well, for the material, we use those texture that we saved. The normal, let me plop it in, and the roughness. Remember, the roughness that come out of substance, to be used in SL, it needs to be inverted. So the whites need to become the blacks and vice versa, because they read them differently. But yes, you're gonna do with these the same thing that you did with the others. You're gonna use your selection to select the part that needs to have the materials. Oh, I think it wasn't positioned well because I wasn't zoomed out. There you go. But so yes, let me grab the selection. Not the skinny one, the big one that we did at the beginning. So you're gonna use that. Let's do the normal first. And you're like, but Onion, now there's only a normal face with the normals on top. Yes, but what we do is we are gonna bake down from the Avalon head or any other head you're using a base normal and specular that we're gonna construct. What you do is just don't put a high poly in, or if you prefer you can do some pores in ZBrush and then bake them down, but just a noise texture and substance on the low poly and bake that down could work for the normals. It's just to simulate a bit of fuzz. And also for the specular you can just decide what you want the skin to be, if it's not too shiny and stuff. So that's what I usually do. It would be nice if the material could bleed with another material, so you could use one of those super cool shines that some store make and just apply the tiny bit on top. But I don't think it's possible, not for all bodies anyway, not for all heads either. But yes, this is how the material goes. You put this in, and then if you bake down the other part, yeah, this is from a previous thing, obviously. Let me see. This is our current one. The one that you're seeing in the background are from my Armand scar. You can see all the details I went into it. There's like some skin erosion and stuff because that was a heavy scar. But yes, let me try and find the one I'm talking about. There we go. As you can see, it's a simple one. There's just a bit of pores here and there, nothing fancy. And you might want to decrease a bit the opacity of this one, otherwise it's gonna be way too aggressive once in a cell. Again, you need to gonna do some trial and error and see what works for you. You do the same exact process for the specular map, and then you can just mirror them for doing the other side. Remember though, when you export the various parts, so the blush, the shadow, you need to make them without a background, and they need to be pure white because we need to tint them once we are in a cell. I hope this little tutorial was useful, and if you have additional questions, please leave them in the comments so I can try to explain there or make an additional video to explain further in certain topics. Well, on your note, bye!